So this bucket of what I call the crude replacements, which are these renewable hydrocarbons, this thing that doesn't yet exist. It's this thing we talk about. It exists in small scale. Companies like mine and many others are doing this, but they're not yet commercially viable. I argue we need them. We need them because if you go ring around the rosy, you still haven't filled the circle. So here's the problem. They carry significant technical risk in development. Okay. Who will refuse to take that risk? Let's start with that question. You know, as Nate mentioned, I used to work at McKinsey & Company before I came here, and when I was at McKinsey, I was part of the risk practice. So I love risk questions, just love talking about risk. And I sort of break risks down into different risks. There's technical risk, we all understand what that is. There's market risk, we sort of understand what that is. There's operational and executional risk. At the 0th order, you could argue that those are the sort of risks that companies have to deal with. Well, the question becomes, which types of those risks do different investors like? Do investors like operational and executional risk? I would argue yes. Public investors love that, right? Even some private investors love that, right? Take a company that has potential, but they're screwing around, get them to do it correctly, turn a profit, you fix it. We love that risk. Market risk. Do we love taking that one? Sometimes, but there's at least a significant segment of the population, of the investing population, that likes taking that risk. What do you mean? People are going to one day have phones that are computers and they're going to talk on them when they're walking around? That sounds a little crazy. I'm willing to try it. Oh, look at this. Lo and behold, we have the cell phone industry. So, you know, some people take those risks, some people don't. But that's a market risk. But when you start to talk about technical risk, as our CFO, who's sitting here, will tell you, there is a very narrow group of investors who are willing to take technical risk when coupled with one other issue, massive amounts of capital deployment. So a lot of people are willing to take technical risk if you're trying to build a new widget, because you can figure out within a few $1 million or tens of millions of dollars or even hundreds of millions of dollars if the little widget's going to work. But when you start talking about tens of billions of dollars, and remember, between 1942 and 1944, just during that little 2-year window when we were trying to figure out how to make the first nuclear reaction, it cost $27 billion. And that was still 14 years before we achieved technology readiness. So when we talk about who's going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to do this, I mean, my conclusion is it's not the public market. It's not, you know, the Googles and the Microsofts of the world. That's not the kind of risk that those companies take, and it's not the kind of risk that their shareholders want them to take. So who's the best person to take that risk? Well, in my belief, it's the government. It's the government of each of these countries. And in particular, when you look historically in the United States, it's been one particular branch of the government that has led the way on every single energy transformation we've seen. And it's been the Department of Defense. And if you double click on that one more, it turns out to be the US Navy. The US Navy has transitioned us single-handedly from effectively mass adoption of wood to coal, coal to oil, and oil to nuclear. And in fact, if you go back to that slide I showed you a while ago, you'll recall that that first real nuclear commercial thing was a nuclear submarine developed by the US Navy. So I hope I've at least convinced you that by 2020, we need to start thinking about having technology readiness for some of those things that don't yet exist. So if you think back to that slide that had on the green stuff that's already ready, the red stuff that's not, we got to get some of the reds into the green, and we've only got about a decade to do it. Why do we only have a decade to do it? Because it's still going to take about another 20 years to scale those up to the point where they matter. How do you do this? Well, you need a lot of political and social will, and you need a lot of discipline. These are things that transcend any election cycle. These are things where the results don't show up tomorrow. And they require doing things that are uncomfortable for a lot of people. I think, you know, people have asked me a lot, what's the right model? I don't know that I have an answer. I mean, I think the Manhattan Project, where an entire nation rallies around a technology problem in war, is one model. I don't think it's the only model. So the one thing that's true is it requires a massive deployment of capital. We've already talked about some numbers. Remember that field in Qatar? That was just $18 billion for one little oil field. You want to talk about bringing one nuclear reactor online? We're talking tens of billions of dollars. So when I say a lot of capital, I'm talking about trillions of dollars need to be spent on this.